Alrighty guys, so by now you should have your fluid surface in the scene with your simple reflective water material applied to it. The next step is to make the water swimmable and start to do some post-process blur underneath, so when the player is actually swimming in the fluid, they get the impression that that they are actually going underwater. So the first thing we need to do to start to get our swimming happening is you need to locate your builder brush. The easy way to do that is just to go to the sidebar here and say go to builder brush, and it will find it wherever it is. If your builder brush isn't showing up for some reason in the scene, it might be a case that you have press B on your keyboard, which is the shortcut to show and hide the builder brush. So just hit B if you can't see it and it should come back. Now we want to select the builder brush, and then I'm going to go into orthographic mode. And the idea is I want to align the top of my builder brush with my fluid surface, which I can also see in the side view here. So this darker red line is my fluid surface, and I've got my builder brush here. So it looks like I'm pretty much aligned at the top anyway. There's a slight bit of overflow, so I might just bring that down. So the first step, is to align the top of the builder brush with where the top of your water surface is, or maybe even slightly above. If it's too low, then the player won't be able to breach the surface when they're swimming. So that's looking pretty good to me. So I'll just zoom out now. Now the next step is in the side views is to make sure that our volume is taking up the entire fluid surface, or the entire area that we want to be swimmable. So I'm going to go to non-uniform scaling, so I can scale it out just across the side here. And all I'm trying to do is just make sure I cover the playable areas of the fluid surface. So that's looking okay from there. I'll just check from my other side view. Let's go back to non-uniform scaling, and you can see I have to scale out here as well. And that's looking pretty good. So any areas that I want to be swimmable are within the volume on both sides. So it looks pretty good. So we select the builder brush now that it's in the right place. We're going to go right click on the add volume button here, and we're going to add a UT water volume. And that should pretty much be it. So let's just, I'll just go back to my game viewport and play. And we should be swimming now. So it still doesn't look like water underneath, but that's cool. We can actually swim, which is a good thing. So if I press and hold space now, I can swim to the top. If I do nothing, the character will very, very, very slowly start to fall towards the ground. Okay, so let's just have a look at a couple of the properties of that volume to see the sort of changes we can make to get different effects. So to do that, I'm just going to go up to the content browser and go across to scene. This will show me everything that I've currently got in the scene. So I want to select my UT water volume, and you should get some properties open up on the side here. If yours aren't open in here, if they're kind of a bit squashed in and it's hard to see what you're doing, you can also right click on the volume itself and bring up the properties dialog that way. So just to quickly go through some of these properties that you might like to play with, as we go down, you've got entry sound and exit sound. You'll notice now that you've put the volume in that if you jump into it and also jump out of it, you'll get a sound that's being played. So if you wanted to keep this as a water surface you'd need to obviously change those sound effects to something you've created yourself. Now in the entry and exit actors, here's where you might put something like a particle effect. If you wanted to create a splash, something that actually came out of the surface, which we can't do with our actual fluid surface. You could put a particle system as the entry actor and one as the exit actor as well. Now moving down here, the next one we'll look at is ground friction. This basically determines how much friction there is between the player and the ground surface when they hit. So if you wanted the player to kind of hit the ground and still move a little bit, kind of ease into their stopping, you could put a lower value there. At the moment at 8, it pretty much means when the player hits the ground, they just stop. Something else you can play with for a bit of fun is the pain causing one here. So as default, I think it's off. You can switch that on and then change the damage per second here and also the pain interval to make it so that the player will actually get damage and potentially die from being within the fluid. So particularly good for stuff like lava, or if you were going to have like a toxic, I guess like some kind of toxic fluid, then you could cause the player pain and make them die eventually. Just a cool thing with this damage per second, if you are using pain causing, you can actually make certain things have regenerative effects by giving that a minus. So rather than saying 15 damage per second, if you were to give it minus 15 per damage per second, it would actually heal the player. So that's pretty cool. And probably the last thing we'll have a look at in here is the fluid friction here, which is pretty much as it says. So the higher the number, the more friction there's going to be with the player moving into that actual volume. So just as an example, I'll bring it up to probably almost double that, or more than double that. Let's go 5. And I'll just play, and it should now be incredibly difficult to move through this surface. No, it's still not too bad. Still not too bad. Maybe I didn't go extreme enough. So I'll just grab my volume again. Let's maybe bring the friction up to, let's say, 50, just to be stupid. Okay, so that's really reduced my movement speed now. So they're probably the main settings. There's a few other ones in there that you can have a bit of a play around with. Most are fairly self-explanatory, like AI should ignore pain, things like that. If you always mouse over the actual parameter, it will tell you what it does and what it doesn't do. But they're the main ones I think we'll be using. Alrighty, so we're pretty much done with the fluid volume for now. So our water's starting to act like water underwater, but it's not looking like water underwater. So let's remedy that now. The way we're going to do that is go back to our builder brush. So just to go to builder brush here. Hopefully your builder brush is going to be in exactly the same position you left it last time. Otherwise you'll have to go and move it around to make sure it's lining up with your water surface. Mine is in the right place, so with it selected, I can now right click and add a volume, just like we did for the water volume. And this time though, I'm going to add a post-process volume. Now it seems like it worked, but there's a really weird thing actually I've noticed with UDK. If we go to our content browser, go to our scene, and have a look at everything in the scene, we don't have any post-process. Now if I go and save, miraculously it shows up. So I don't know. I have had it actually show up in the scene without me saving just a few minutes later. So I guess UDK just needs some time to think about it. Alright, so we've got our post-process in now. I'll just jump in game and see what we get out of the box. Literally nothing, which is great. So we'll go back to our content browser, back to scene, and find the post-process. Open up the properties here. If you don't like working with the properties within this window, you can always, once you've selected the post-process, you can right click on it and get the separate dialog box that way. Okay, so a few settings to look at here. Override world post-process, I'll turn on. I don't actually have a world post-process chain at the moment, but if I did, I would still want it to look different when the player's underwater, so I would want it to override. Bloom I'm not going to use underwater. Bloom just can create a bit of a soft glow around sort of emissive objects or white objects, but we're not going to need it, so I'll just turn that one off. Depth of field we definitely do want on, so I'm going to switch that one on. Motion blur can stay. That looks pretty cool. So now that we've enabled depth of field, I'll just, actually I don't even need to jump in. If I can just get the camera underwater or into the volume, we should be able to start to see what the post-process is doing. So it's probably the easiest way, is just to mess with the settings while we're actually under there, so we can see the effect. So we can see I do have blur, but one major issue is there's no blur close to the player, and of course when you're underwater, water is on your eyes, literally on them. So we need to make some changes to get that happening. So one thing I'll do as we move down, this where are we? Blur kernel size is the one I want. I'm going to reduce that to about 5, just to create a bit of a softer blur. So that's not too bad. 16, 5. I can't decide now. No, I'll leave it at 5, that's fine. Now the fall off exponent, I'm going to bring that really close. So let's go about to 0.2, which should make the blur start to come a bit closer to the player, which it has done. It's not all the way yet, but we'll get there. Now the focus distance can stay, depth of field inner radius. This we're going to change. Let's change this to 100. This is going to bring the strong blur all the way up to the player's eyes. So you can see now we don't have any focus. So we're completely blurry, which is how we want to be underwater, unless we're a reptile. Focus distance is fine. This interpolation duration, we will change that perhaps a little bit later, and I'll explain to you at that stage what that does. The scene desaturation here, this is just literally is what it says. So if I were to give it a value of 1, it would actually strip all color from the post-process volume. So you can completely desaturate. Once you've desaturated, you can then colorize. So in this example, all the X, Y, and Z components relate to RG and B values. So if I were to play around with some of these RGB values, you can see I can begin to affect some color in the scene. So I'm just playing around with random values here just to see different sort of effects I can get. So yeah, it desaturates it completely and then colorizes it. I'm just going to set all these back to default for the moment. And actually I'm going to switch both of these off. Now down here under your scene highlights, scene midtones, scene shadows, this is just another way that you can go about colorizing what's going on with your post-process volume. So if I were to go, and of course they just affect what they say they're affecting. So if I wanted to go, let's go midtones. Let's reduce this, which would be the red value. Let's reduce it to about 0.2. Oh my god! So you see that really blew it out. Yeah. So the midtones is going to be pretty strong no matter what you change. It's going to change a lot of it, whereas shadows and highlights, the changes are not going to be as abrasive, I wouldn't think. They should be a bit more subtle. Yeah. So you can muck around with them to get different sort of, different colorizations under the water, which is a bit of fun. I'll just do a search now for interp, and that's going to give us every interpolation parameter. Now all these durations, I'm actually going to turn them all to small values. And basically what these, I just changed them all. You can only, if you want to, just change the depth of field, which is the one you're using. What this duration controls is when the player is entering and exiting the post-process volume, it determines where there's an amount of time to kind of adjust to the new settings. So in the instance of the DOF interpolation duration, if this were quite high, it would mean when I enter water, it might take 2 seconds or so before the actual blur effect starts, and when I exit water, it can take about 2 seconds before that blur effect wears off, and I get back to the kind of clarity of the post-process in the world. So again, being that it's water, I just want, as soon as I get in the water, I want it to be blurry, and as soon as I get out, I want it to be crisp. But that's just me. You can do your own stuff there if you like. So just clear it from interp. And I'm going to jump in scene and play just to see how it's all working when I enter and exit the water. So it's blurring nice and quick when I go under the water, and it's coming back to normal nice and quick when I exit the water, which is good. But now it's blurry, but I still want to add some color under here. It still definitely does not look like I'm underwater. So I'm just going to go back to my content browser and my scene, select my post-process volume. It's really difficult to say when you said it 100 times in one day. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at doing some colorization. So I might just do a bit of an overall colorization. Expand that. Let's bring the X down. Let's go like 0.5. Okay, you can see the way that the actual builder brush color has changed. That I've now given kind of colorized everything with a bit of a blue hue, which of course reacts with the other colors in the scene. But if I were to pop out now, so you can see particularly it's noticeable in the editor with that we're getting that. Now I probably want it. It's not too bad. I want it to be darker. I want it to be darker underwater, so I'll probably do some work with, just open up my content browser again. At this stage I'm probably going to do some work with the shadows. So just setting the X to 0.2. I might bring them all down. It's probably going to be too... No, it is definitely going to be too dark. Let's try 0.0. Nope. Okay, that's not too... it's not too bad. Let's have a look in game. So it's definitely starting to create a bit of a nicer effect. Obviously there's a bunch of work that needs to be done to make sure that your colors are blending. You can see here mine definitely isn't in this instance because I'm using this very reddy kind of texture in my material underneath the water, whereas it's very clear when I'm standing here that it's red, and when I go under it becomes a kind of a greeny blue. So that's definitely going to break immersion. I'm not going to fix it today though. Some other day maybe. But yeah, it's going to be determined on a bunch of things. So whatever color the texture is you have under the water, you're going to have to do a lot of work in blending your post-process to make sure that it's going to give you what you need to do. So it's all looking a bit crazy at the moment. It's a bit 80s, like a bit Blood Dragon. Anyway. So I'll just go back to the properties now, if I can find it. Where are we? Here we are. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's the basics of doing your water volumes and basics of doing your post-process volumes. And obviously there's a million sort of things that you can do in the settings to change the way that it works. I've kind of touched, I guess, just the surface here and what you can do. And in any scene, it's going to take a lot. I'm talking hours and hours and hours and hours of tweaking to make sure that all the colors in your scene are all going to be sitting together. So you can have a lot of fun playing around with all these different settings to get all sorts of different wild and wacky effects. And you'll probably figure out a bunch of cool stuff that I don't even know about. So there you go, guys. In the next tutorial, we're going to start looking at more fluid interactions. So we're going to be introducing the fluid influence actor. We're also going to be looking at doing buoyancy of objects, and I'll also be showing you how to make K actors or physics actors, how to make them interact with the fluid surface. So ideally we should be able to throw a barrel into the water and it will react to that just as it would a player. So I will see you guys in the next tube. Cheers, bye.